I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Your mind has been working steadily, turning thoughts over gently like stones in a river, exploring questions with patience and care. You'll discover why some minds never seem to quiet down. And by the end, you'll understand that thinking deeply isn't a flaw. It's how certain brains make sense of a complicated world. Welcome to Psychology Facts to Fall Asleep. 2. Now settle in. You're in your safe space while your brain quietly processes the day, replaying conversations, analyzing decisions, wondering about tomorrow. Allow yourself this moment to simply be. We'll journey through 100 psychology facts about minds that think too much. From the neural pathways that never quite rest, to the invisible weight of carrying everyone's emotions, to the moment you realize deep thinking is both gift and burden. This thoughtful journey through consciousness builds bridges between searching minds. A gentle like, subscribe, or sharing your thoughts creates a pathway for more overthinkers to discover this sanctuary and brings us closer to protect this space. One sleepy soul at a time. Your quiet presence here means everything. Let yourself settle completely here. Feel your jaw unclench, your breath deepen naturally. You can let these thoughts drift past without holding them. Sense that soothing heaviness enveloping you, like your consciousness slowly dimming its brightness. Thoughts dissolving into the peaceful fog of approaching sleep, safe and undisturbed. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You're floating where racing thoughts finally slow to a gentle drift. Let your mind release its grip on every question. And now we begin. People who think too much aren't broken. They're simply wired differently. Recent research suggests that a substantial majority of adults between ages 25 and 45 experience persistent overthinking, with higher rates among those with above-average intelligence and emotional sensitivity. The brain's default mode network, discovered through fMRI studies at Stanford University, remains more active in chronic overthinkers, even during tasks requiring focus. This network includes the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, responsible for self-referential thinking and imagining future scenarios. When it runs too actively, it creates a constant internal dialogue that feels impossible to silence. Your mind isn't malfunctioning when it replays conversations at 2 in the morning. It's doing what evolution designed certain brains to do: analyze social situations deeply. The exhaustion you feel isn't weakness. It's the natural result of a brain working overtime. Overthinking has a distinct neurological signature that scientists can now observe in real time. Research published in recent neuroscience journals shows that individuals prone to rumination display heightened connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, the brain's fear center. This hyperconnectivity creates a feedback loop where rational thinking gently blends with emotional responses, like two streams meeting and flowing together. Studies reveal that overthinkers process neutral information through emotional filters more intensely than average, meaning a simple text message triggers the same neural cascade as a genuine threat. The brain releases cortisol and adrenaline, preparing for danger that doesn't exist. Your racing thoughts aren't imagination. They're visible electrical patterns that researchers can measure and understand. This visibility matters because it transforms a personal experience into a documented neurological pattern. The tendency to overthink often begins in childhood, shaped by early experiences that teach hypervigilance. Developmental psychology research has tracked children over many years and found that those raised in unpredictable environments, where a parent's mood could shift suddenly, where safety felt conditional on perfect behavior, developed heightened threat detection systems. By age 10, their brains had learned to constantly scan for danger in tone of voice, facial expressions, and unspoken tension. This wasn't conscious learning, but deep neurological adaptation. The hippocampus, responsible for contextual memory, becomes oversensitized to storing negative experiences with vivid detail. A single moment of rejection or criticism gets encoded with significant intensity. Years later, these childhood patterns persist. A colleague's brief silence becomes evidence of disapproval. An unanswered text means abandonment. The child who learned that thinking ahead helped navigate difficulty becomes the adult whose mind never stops preparing. This isn't overthinking by choice. It's a survival strategy that outlived its usefulness. Highly sensitive people, who comprise roughly 20 to 30% of the population, according to research by Dr. Elaine Aron, process sensory and emotional information more thoroughly than others. Their nervous systems have lower thresholds for stimulation, meaning what feels like background noise to most people registers as overwhelming input. Studies show that highly sensitive individuals have more active mirror neuron systems, causing them to literally feel others' emotions in their own bodies. When someone nearby is anxious, their heart rate increases. When someone is sad, their chest tightens. This deep empathy comes with a cost. Constant emotional processing that resembles overthinking. After a social gathering, while others feel energized, sensitive individuals need hours or days to metabolize everything they absorbed. Every conversation gets analyzed not just for words spoken, but for micro-expressions, vocal inflections, energy shifts. They replay interactions, searching for what they might have missed. This isn't paranoia. It's a nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do: process information deeply. The internal monologue that characterizes overthinking operates significantly faster than external speech. Research suggests that internal speech runs several times the speed of conversation, though exact measurements vary widely. Studies on inner experience found that chronic overthinkers maintain multiple simultaneous thought streams, analyzing the past, planning the future, critiquing the present, and monitoring their own thinking process all at once. Brain imaging shows this corresponds to simultaneous activation across multiple brain regions. It's like running many browser tabs while also monitoring system performance. The cognitive load is immense. By evening, decision fatigue sets in not from making big choices, but from the thousands of micro-evaluations happening every hour. Should I have said that differently? Did they understand what I meant? What will they think of me? Am I overthinking this? The mind examining itself creates infinite loops. Exhausting but inescapable. Perfectionism and overthinking share deep neurological roots in the brain's reward and threat systems. Research reveals that individuals with perfectionistic tendencies show reduced dopamine response to successful task completion compared to non-perfectionists. Essentially, their brains don't fully register accomplishment. When most people finish a project, their nucleus accumbens releases dopamine, creating satisfaction. Perfectionists experience a muted response, followed by immediate activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, which signals that something is wrong. This neurochemical pattern means completion never feels complete. The mind immediately searches for flaws, for what could have been better, for potential criticisms others might have. Perfectionism isn't about having high standards. It's about a threat detection system that won't allow the feeling of being safe or good enough. Overthinking becomes the tool used to scan for the danger that perfectionism insists must be there. You review the email many times, not because you're thorough, but because your brain chemistry won't signal that it's safe to stop checking. The concept of rumination, clinically defined as repetitive thinking about past events and their meanings, affects a substantial portion of the population. Rumination differs from productive reflection in one crucial way. It loops without leading to resolution or action. Research shows that ruminative thinking actually impairs problem-solving ability by narrowing attention to abstract why questions rather than concrete what or how questions. Brain scans reveal that during rumination, activity decreases in regions responsible for executive function and flexible thinking. Meanwhile, areas linked to self-focused attention become hyperactive. This creates a mental state where you're deeply absorbed in analyzing yourself but unable to think clearly about solutions. Hours can pass, replaying a conversation, trying to understand why it went wrong, what it means about you. The rumination feels productive, like if you just think about it enough, you'll figure it out. But neuroscience shows it's cognitive quicksand. The more you struggle to think your way out, the deeper you sink into the pattern. Anxiety and overthinking exist in a bidirectional relationship, each feeding the other in measurable ways. Research shows that individuals with generalized anxiety disorder commonly report chronic overthinking. While many chronic overthinkers develop clinically significant anxiety over time, the mechanism works through anticipatory processing. When the amygdala flags something as potentially threatening, it sends signals to the prefrontal cortex requesting analysis. In balanced brains, this analysis concludes relatively quickly. In anxiety-prone brains, the prefrontal cortex generates multiple scenarios, each triggering another amygdala alert, creating a persistent cycle that can feel overwhelming but is actually changeable with the right support. Neurotransmitter studies show that chronic overthinkers often have dysregulated GABA, the brain's primary calming neurotransmitter. With insufficient GABA, the brain struggles to quiet worry signals. Thoughts that should naturally fade instead persist and multiply. What starts as preparation becomes hours of imagining everything that could go wrong. The thinking feels like preparation, but neurologically, it's anxiety generating more, thinking generating more anxiety. Sleep disruption and overthinking form a cycle that recent research has carefully mapped. Studies show that anxious rumination before bed increases the number of REM awakenings significantly. Each awakening interrupts the emotional processing that should be happening. Unprocessed emotions accumulate like unfinished tasks, giving the mind more material to overthink the next day. The relationship works both ways. Overthinking prevents deep sleep, and sleep deprivation increases overthinking. After just one night of poor sleep, certain brain regions become hyperactive, while others show decreased regulation. The brain literally loses some ability to determine what's worth worrying about. Everything feels urgent. Every thought feels important. The exhaustion isn't just physical. It's a mind running on a battery that never fully recharges, trying to process a world that feels increasingly overwhelming. Understanding that overthinking has biological roots is already changing how we see our own minds. These aren't character flaws or failures of willpower. They're measurable patterns in brain activity, neurotransmitter levels, and neural connectivity shaped by genetics, experience, and their complex interaction. We've glimpsed that the mind working over time isn't a malfunction. It's evolution's way of protecting creatures who survived by thinking ahead, by reading social cues, by preparing for danger before it arrived. In our ancestors, these traits meant survival. In modern life, they can mean suffering. But understanding creates the first opening for change. Not fixing or forcing, but seeing clearly what's actually happening beneath the cascade of thoughts. Decision fatigue in overthinkers manifests differently than in the general population. While most people make thousands of decisions daily, with gradually depleting cognitive resources, chronic overthinkers make far fewer actual decisions, but expend equivalent or greater mental energy. The difference lies in what researchers call predecisional rumination, the overthinking phase before any choice gets made. Studies show that for overthinkers, even minor decisions activate extensive neural networks, typically reserved for major choices. Brain scans reveal simultaneous activity in regions for risk assessment, social evaluation, and self-criticism. Choosing between two shirts can trigger thoughts about how others will perceive you, whether it matches your identity, what impression you're trying to create. The decision becomes entangled with identity and worthiness. By afternoon, with limited actual choices made, the cognitive resources are already depleted. The exhaustion is real, even when the decisions aren't. The relationship between intelligence and overthinking has been documented across multiple studies, though the connection is more nuanced than simple correlation. Research found that individuals scoring in the top ranges on verbal reasoning tests were more likely to report chronic overthinking compared to average scorers. However, the relationship isn't directly causal. Higher intelligence doesn't cause overthinking. Instead, the same neural characteristics that enable complex analytical thinking, extensive prefrontal cortex development, strong working memory, ability to hold multiple perspectives, also create vulnerability to rumination when combined with anxiety or past trauma. These individuals can construct elaborate chains of reasoning, imagine detailed future scenarios, and analyze situations from countless angles. In safe contexts, this ability serves them well. In threatening or ambiguous situations, it becomes a prison. They can think of hundreds of ways things might go wrong, can remember every past difficulty in vivid detail. Intelligence gives them the tools to build very convincing cases against themselves. Social media's impact on overthinking patterns has emerged as a significant research focus. Studies tracking brain activity while using various platforms reveal that social media engagement activates the same neural circuits involved in social threat detection. But whereas ancestral social groups involved perhaps 150 people, social media exposes users to thousands of social signals daily. Likes, comments, views, comparisons. For overthinkers, each interaction becomes data requiring analysis. Why did that person like this post, but not that one? What does this comment really mean? Research found that frequent social media users spend considerable time daily in post-interaction rumination, mentally replaying what they shared, evaluating responses, imagining how they're being perceived. The comparison mechanism is particularly difficult. Constantly viewing curated highlights of others' lives, while intimately knowing your own struggles, creates a distorted baseline. Platform designs can exploit the overthinking tendency, keeping users engaged through ambiguity and intermittent validation. Childhood emotional neglect, even in otherwise functional families, creates lasting patterns of overthinking. Research shows that children who don't receive consistent emotional attunement develop what's called unsure self-knowledge. Their parents may have provided physical care, education, and stability, but missed emotional cues or dismissed feelings. These children learn that their inner experiences aren't reliable guides. As adults, they overthink every emotion, every desire, every reaction, searching for objective evidence about whether what they feel is valid. Studies found that individuals with histories of emotional neglect show reduced connectivity between brain regions that process bodily sensations and those that interpret them. This disconnection means they can't easily trust gut feelings or emotional knowing. Simple questions like, "What do I want?" or "How do I feel?" require extensive analysis. The overthinking serves as a substitute for the missing internal compass, an exhausting attempt to think their way to certainty about their own experience. The phenomenon of analysis paralysis has distinct neurological markers that explain why some people get stuck in endless consideration without action. Research identified what they call the decision threshold problem in chronic overthinkers. During decision-making tasks, most brains accumulate evidence toward a choice and reach a firing threshold that triggers commitment. In overthinkers, this threshold is set significantly higher, requiring more certainty before action feels safe. Additionally, their brains show unusual activity patterns in regions that evaluate potential rewards and punishments. They simultaneously imagine positive outcomes triggering one pattern and negative outcomes triggering another, creating neural competition that delays resolution. The experience feels like being genuinely unable to choose, caught between equally compelling but contradictory trains of thought. What observers might interpret as indecisiveness is actually a brain unable to generate the neural signature that signals enough information. Commit now. The person isn't being difficult. Their decision-making threshold literally requires more data than situations typically provide. They're waiting for a certainty that neurology proves will never come. Empaths, individuals with heightened ability to sense others' emotional states, face unique overthinking challenges. Research shows that people who identify as empaths display significantly greater mirror neuron activation when observing others' emotional expressions. Mirror neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it, creating a simulation of their experience in our own brain. For highly empathic individuals, this means they don't just observe someone's sadness. They feel an echo of it in their own nervous system. After social interactions, they must process not only their own experience, but the absorbed emotions of everyone they encountered. The overthinking comes from trying to separate what's genuinely theirs from what they picked up from others. Was that anxiety mine, or did I sense it from my coworker? Am I actually upset, or am I feeling someone else's mood? The boundaries between self and other become blurred at a neurological level. Hours of mental processing are required to sort through the emotional data, to understand what belongs where. What looks like overthinking social situations is actually emotional digestion of absorbed experiences. Trauma fundamentally rewires the brain's threat detection systems in ways that lead to chronic overthinking as a protective strategy. Research using advanced brain imaging shows that traumatic experiences, particularly those involving interpersonal harm, create lasting changes in the amygdala's sensitivity and the prefrontal cortex's regulatory capacity. In individuals with trauma histories, the amygdala remains in heightened alert, flagging ambiguous situations as potentially dangerous. A person's neutral facial expression gets read as angry. An unanswered text becomes evidence of abandonment. The overthinking emerges as the prefrontal cortex tries to make sense of these signals. Searching for the hidden threat, the amygdala insists exists. Research on trauma shows that this pattern exists below conscious awareness. The person genuinely believes their extensive analysis is warranted by real danger in the situation. They don't realize their brain is responding to old wounds rather than present reality. The rumination becomes a way of seeking safety through thinking, of preparing gently for possibilities, of learning from the past without being trapped by it. Except thinking can't heal what happened. It only exhausts. The gut-brain axis plays a surprising role in overthinking patterns, with emerging research revealing how digestive health influences rumination. Studies demonstrate that the gut microbiome produces approximately 90% of the body's serotonin and influences GABA production, both crucial neurotransmitters for mood regulation and anxiety control. In individuals with gut dysbiosis, imbalanced intestinal bacteria, researchers found significantly higher rates of intrusive thoughts and worry compared to those with healthy microbiomes. The vagus nerve, which connects the gut to the brain, carries signals in both directions. An inflamed or distressed digestive system sends stress signals to the brain, activating worry circuits even when no external threat exists. This creates what feels like baseless anxiety, giving the mind something to overthink about. Why am I anxious? Is something wrong that I'm not aware of? The thinking tries to find the cause of the physical sensation, not realizing the cause is intestinal inflammation, not impending disaster. Dietary changes that restore gut health have shown measurable reductions in rumination, suggesting that some overthinking has partly biological, digestive origins, rather than purely psychological ones. Gender differences in overthinking patterns have been well documented, though the causes remain debated between biological and social factors. Research found that women report overthinking at approximately twice the rate of men, with particularly high rates around social relationships and perceived mistakes. Brain imaging studies show some subtle differences. Women tend to have stronger connectivity between emotional processing regions and language centers, potentially making it easier to verbalize and elaborate on emotional experiences. However, social conditioning likely plays an equally important role. Girls are socialized to be hyper-aware of others' feelings, to manage relationships, to consider themselves when things go wrong. By adulthood, these patterns are deeply ingrained. Women often overthink whether they've hurt someone, whether they're being too much or not enough, whether they have the right to feel what they feel. Cultural messages about perfectionism and caretaking create fertile ground for rumination. Men tend to overthink differently, more focused on performance, competence, and status. They replay professional setbacks, worry about appearing weak, ruminate about whether they measure up. The content differs, but the mechanism is similar. A mind trying to think its way to safety. The relationship between creativity and overthinking reveals a complicated truth. The same cognitive flexibility that enables creative thinking can trap individuals in endless mental loops. Research found that highly creative individuals score significantly higher on measures of both divergent thinking, the ability to generate many possible solutions, and rumination. Their minds naturally explore multiple perspectives, make unusual connections, and imagine alternative realities. In creative work, this produces innovation. In personal life, it produces overthinking. They can imagine dozens of ways a conversation might unfold, can see situations from countless angles, can construct elaborate narratives about what someone's behavior might mean. Studies show increased activity in the default mode network during creative tasks. The same brain network, hyperactive during rumination. The creative mind and the overthinking mind use remarkably similar neural pathways. The difference lies in control and direction. Creativity channels this mental fluidity toward productive creation, while overthinking spins in circles analyzing threats. Many artists and innovators describe their overthinking as inseparable from their creative gift. The same mind that produces beautiful work also produces sleepless nights. The gift and the burden share the same source. Chronic overthinking affects physical health through prolonged activation of the stress response system. Research shows that individuals who score high on rumination measures display elevated levels of inflammatory markers, even when controlling for other lifestyle factors. The mechanism involves the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When the brain perceives threat, whether real or imagined, it signals the release of cortisol and other stress hormones. These prepare the body for immediate action, but rumination keeps the system activated for hours or days, flooding the body with stress chemicals designed for short-term emergency use. Chronic cortisol elevation suppresses immune function, increases blood pressure, disrupts sleep, and promotes inflammation. Studies found that overthinkers experience more sick days per year and have slower wound healing. The body pays for what the mind cannot release. Headaches, digestive issues, muscle tension, and fatigue aren't separate from the overthinking. They're direct consequences of a nervous system trapped in perpetual alert mode, defending against dangers that exist only in thought. The concept of thought suppression reveals why trying not to overthink typically makes it worse. When you try to suppress a thought, the brain actually splits processing between two tasks: the conscious effort to avoid thinking about something, and the unconscious monitoring to check if you're succeeding. This monitoring requires accessing the very thought you're trying to avoid, creating a rebound effect where the suppressed thought returns more frequently and with greater intensity. Neuroscience research shows that attempted thought suppression increases activity in regions associated with cognitive control, while paradoxically strengthening the neural representation of the unwanted thought. For overthinkers, this creates an exhausting cycle. They notice they're ruminating, try to stop, which increases awareness of the rumination, which intensifies it. Telling yourself stop overthinking activates overthinking about overthinking. The effort to control thought actually reduces control. Recent therapeutic approaches suggest acceptance rather than suppression, noticing thoughts without trying to eliminate them, which paradoxically reduces their frequency and intensity by breaking the monitoring feedback loop. Attachment styles formed in early childhood create distinct overthinking patterns that persist into adulthood. Research shows that individuals with anxious attachment developed when caregivers were inconsistent or unpredictable, remain in a state of hypervigilance about relationships. Brain imaging studies reveal they show heightened amygdala response to neutral faces and ambiguous social cues. Their nervous systems learn that love could change without warning, so they constantly scan for signs of abandonment. This manifests as overthinking every interaction with romantic partners, friends, and colleagues. A delayed text response triggers hours of rumination. Did I say something wrong? Are they pulling away? Should I reach out or give space? The thinking feels like problem solving, but it's actually a protective response. A child's attempt to figure out what they need to do to keep the caregiver close. Those with avoidant attachment overthink differently, obsessively analyzing whether they're losing independence, whether someone is getting too close. Both patterns stem from nervous systems shaped by early experiences, trying to think their way to the safety they never fully felt. Metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, reaches unusual levels in chronic overthinkers, creating layers of rumination that can feel inescapable. Research found that overthinkers don't just ruminate about events, they ruminate about ruminating. They think about why they overthink, judge themselves for overthinking, worry about whether the overthinking means something is wrong with them, then overthink that worry. Brain scans during metacognitive tasks show activation in the most evolved part of the prefrontal cortex, which allows self-reflection. In overthinkers, this region shows persistent activity even during rest, suggesting constant self-monitoring. The experience is like standing between two mirrors that reflect infinitely. Each layer of thinking generates awareness of that thinking, which becomes another layer to analyze. Common patterns include, "Why can't I just let this go?" followed by, "Why am I thinking about why I can't let this go?" followed by, "This is exhausting. I need to stop," which itself becomes something to think about. The layers stack until the original thought is buried. Breaking this cycle requires disrupting the metacognitive monitoring itself, which feels nearly impossible when your primary tool is thinking. After exploring these facts about recognition, we're beginning to see overthinking not as a personal failure, but as a complex interplay of neurology, development, trauma, temperament, and learned patterns. The brains of people who think too much aren't defective. They're different, more sensitive to threat, more attuned to social cues, more capable of imagining multiple futures, more connected to emotional processing. In certain environments and with certain experiences, these traits become survival tools. In others, they become sources of suffering. Understanding this matters profoundly. It shifts the question from what's wrong with me to what happened to me, and how did my brain adapt? That shift creates space for something other than self-blame. Not fixing, not forcing different thoughts, but seeing clearly what's actually happening. The recognition phase acknowledges the weight you've been carrying, the exhausting vigilance, the constant analysis, the search for certainty through thinking. It's real, it's measurable, and you're not alone in it. Let's pause here and notice something different. Not your thoughts this time, but your body. Place one hand on your chest. Feel it rising and falling. Your heart has been beating this whole time without you thinking about it. Your lungs have been breathing. Notice how tired your jaw feels, how heavy your shoulders are from holding tension. All that thinking creates physical tightness. Now, with each breath out, Imagine releasing just a tiny bit of that holding. You don't have to release all of it, just a little. Your body knows how to rest, even when your mind doesn't. Trust it for these few moments. Now we continue understanding. The default mode network, a system of brain regions that activates during rest and mind wandering, functions differently in chronic overthinkers. Discovered through landmark fMRI research, the DMN includes the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus. In most people, this network activates during rest and deactivates during focused tasks. But recent research shows that in chronic ruminators, the DMN remains partially active even during concentration, creating what researchers call task-unrelated thought intrusion. This explains why overthinkers struggle to fully engage in the present moment. Part of their brain is always elsewhere, reviewing the past, imagining the future, analyzing the self. The DMN's hyperactivity isn't a choice. It's a baseline difference in how these brains operate. Meditation studies show it can be modulated with practice, but the tendency toward mind wandering represents deep-seated wiring. Understanding this helps explain why simple instructions like "just be present" don't work. The architecture supports distraction and self-reflection as default states. Changing requires rewiring, not willpower. Intergenerational transmission of anxiety and overthinking patterns occurs through both genetic and environmental pathways. Recent research shows that chronic stress in parents can alter gene expression in ways that get passed to children. Studies tracking multiple generations of families with anxiety disorders found that children of anxious parents showed differences in cortisol regulation even as infants, before environmental factors could fully take effect. But genetics isn't destiny. The environmental component may be even more powerful. Children of overthinkers witness and absorb worry patterns from an early age. They hear constant what-if thinking, watch loved ones struggle with decisions, learn that the world requires vigilant analysis. Mirror neurons fire as they observe anxious behaviors, essentially practicing overthinking through observation. By adolescence, the patterns are deeply ingrained. They inherit both the temperament that makes rumination more likely and the modeled behavior that demonstrates it's how concerns should be approached. Breaking intergenerational patterns requires recognizing that what you learned about thinking isn't truth. It's what you absorbed from nervous systems trying their best to protect you. The negativity bias, an evolutionary tendency to focus more on negative than positive information, amplifies overthinking patterns. Research in cognitive psychology shows that the brain reacts more strongly to negative stimuli than equally intense positive stimuli. A single criticism requires approximately 5 pieces of positive feedback to counterbalance its emotional impact. From an evolutionary perspective, this made sense. An ancestor who overlooked a potential threat once might not survive. One who overlooked a potential reward just missed dinner. The mind that erred on the side of caution survived. Modern research found that negative images generate larger brain responses, and the brain spends more time processing them. For overthinkers, this bias means their rumination naturally gravitates toward negative possibilities, past mistakes, and potential threats. A conversation might have had 20 neutral moments and one slightly awkward exchange, but the overthinking focuses entirely on that one moment, amplifying it. searching for its meaning. Positive experiences slip through awareness like water, while negative ones stick. Understanding the negativity bias doesn't eliminate it, but recognizing that your brain's threat detection is overactive, not accurate, creates some distance from the thoughts it generates. Working memory capacity relates to overthinking in counterintuitive ways. One might assume limited working memory would reduce rumination. You simply can't hold enough information to overthink. But research found the opposite. People with higher working memory capacity actually engage in more complex rumination because they can maintain multiple thought threads simultaneously. They can hold in mind what someone said, how they said it, what it might mean, how it relates to previous interactions, what they should have responded, and what the implications are for the future, all while also monitoring their own reaction to this analysis. Their rumination is more elaborate, more detailed, and harder to escape precisely because they have the cognitive resources to sustain it. Those with lower working memory capacity tend towards simpler worry patterns that lose track more easily. The research challenges the assumption that cognitive abilities always serve us well. Sometimes, the capacity that enables complex problem-solving in professional contexts becomes a prison in personal contexts, providing just enough mental bandwidth to construct elaborate, difficult scenarios and loop through them endlessly. Cultural factors shape both the expression and acceptance of overthinking in ways that researchers are only beginning to quantify. A comprehensive cross-cultural study compared rumination patterns across many countries. Western individualistic cultures showed higher rates of self-focused rumination, overthinking about personal adequacy, achievement, identity. Collectivist cultures showed more relationship-focused rumination, overthinking about social harmony, others' perceptions, group belonging. Both patterns are exhausting, but the content reflects what each culture emphasizes. Additionally, Western culture's emphasis on positive thinking creates secondary suffering around overthinking. Not only do people ruminate, they feel ashamed that they can't just be positive. Messages constantly reinforced through self-help culture and social media. The study found that societies with less stigma around mental struggle showed equal rates of overthinking but less distress about overthinking itself. The problem isn't just the rumination. It's the cultural narrative that says you should control your mind through willpower. Understanding the cultural dimension helps separate the experience itself from the stories about what the experience means. Neurodivergence, particularly ADHD and autism, creates unique overthinking patterns that differ from anxiety-based rumination. Research shows that autistic individuals often engage in what's called cognitive perseveration, getting mentally stuck on particular topics or questions, not from anxiety, but from how their brains process information. The autistic mind often requires complete understanding before moving on, leading to hours spent researching a question or trying to understand a social interaction. This isn't worry in the traditional sense, but a different kind of cognitive demand for closure. A DHD presents differently. The racing thoughts emerge from difficulty filtering relevant from irrelevant information. Studies show ADHD brains generate more thoughts per minute, creating a constant stream of mental content that demands attention. For individuals with both anxiety and neurodivergence, overthinking becomes layered. The natural cognitive patterns of their neurodivergence, plus the threat-focused rumination of anxiety. What looks like simple overthinking may actually be multiple neurological processes happening simultaneously. Understanding this matters for approaching the pattern effectively. The relationship between overthinking and insomnia goes beyond obvious sleep disruption. Research reveals that chronic rumination actually alters circadian rhythm regulation. Evening cortisol, which should drop to allow melatonin production, remains elevated in chronic overthinkers. Their thoughts trigger enough physiological arousal to disrupt the natural circadian wind-down. Brain imaging during pre-sleep rumination shows activity patterns more similar to problem-solving than rest. The brain genuinely believes it's working on important issues, even though the thinking is unproductive. This creates a cycle. Poor sleep increases next-day rumination, which increases next night's sleep disruption. Over time, the association between bed and anxious thinking becomes conditioned. The bedroom, meant to signal safety and rest, sometimes becomes a quiet space where thoughts arise naturally as the day settles. Studies show that reducing time in bed actually improves sleep quality for ruminators by strengthening the bed-sleep association and increasing sleep pressure that overrides overthinking. The mind's resistance to rest isn't personal weakness. It's a nervous system caught in a measurable physiological pattern that requires retraining, not willpower. Loneliness paradoxically increases overthinking, which then creates more loneliness. Research shows lonely individuals display heightened attention to social threats, rejection, criticism, exclusion, which leads to extensive rumination about social interactions. After a conversation, they replay every moment, searching for evidence that the other person didn't truly like them or want their company. This hypervigilance stems from what researchers call social pain. Brain imaging shows that social rejection activates the same neural regions as physical pain. The brain treats both as legitimate threats requiring analysis. Lonely people overthink social situations, trying to figure out what they did wrong, how to address future rejection, whether anyone genuinely cares about them. But this very overthinking often creates self-fulfilling prophecies. The anxiety makes social interactions feel forced or awkward, leading to withdrawal, which increases isolation, which intensifies the rumination. The loneliest people often have the most active social lives in their heads, endlessly analyzing connections they can't quite feel secure in. Understanding that loneliness is triggering the brain's pain system, not revealing some truth about unworthiness, can begin to loosen the thought patterns. Mindfulness-based interventions specifically target the metacognitive awareness that characterizes overthinking, with measurable changes in brain function. Research using fMRI before and after mindfulness training shows decreased density in the amygdala and increased cortical thickness in areas associated with attention and emotional regulation. The key mechanism isn't thought suppression, but changing the relationship to thoughts. Traditional advice says, stop overthinking, which requires fighting thoughts. Mindfulness teaches observing thoughts without identifying with them or being compelled to follow them. Studies show that after training, participants still experience intrusive thoughts at similar frequencies, but report significantly less distress and less elaboration of those thoughts. The thoughts arise. They're noted. They pass. Brain scans show reduced connectivity during rumination triggers, suggesting less self-referential elaboration. This isn't a quick solution. The research shows benefits emerge after consistent practice over time, but it demonstrates that the relationship to overthinking can fundamentally change at a neurological level. The thoughts don't have to mean anything. or require analysis. They can simply be mental events passing through awareness. Cognitive distortions, systematic errors in thinking, identified in cognitive therapy, form the content of most overthinking episodes. Dr. Aaron Beck's research identified patterns like catastrophizing, assuming the worst possible outcome, mind reading, believing you know what others think, and personalization, taking responsibility for events outside your control. Research found that chronic ruminators experience many cognitive distortions per hour during worry episodes. The thinking feels logical in the moment, reasonable sounding structure, but the premise is distorted. Brain imaging during cognitive distortion shows activation patterns similar to deductive reasoning, suggesting the mind is genuinely trying to solve problems through analysis. But the starting assumptions are flawed. The conclusion that you're inadequate because one project struggled is logical only if you accept the distorted premise that any imperfection equals complete failure. Challenging these distortions requires recognizing them in real time, which is difficult when you're inside the thought pattern. But understanding that rumination often follows distorted logic rather than truth creates a critical foothold. The thinking isn't giving you accurate information about reality. It's running flawed programs that generate suffering. The role of inflammation in overthinking has emerged as a surprising research frontier. Studies show that systemic inflammation, measured through inflammatory markers, correlates strongly with rumination severity even when controlling for depression. The mechanism appears to involve inflammatory signals reaching the brain and activating threat response circuits. During illness, this serves a protective function. Inflammation makes us feel lethargic and worried, encouraging rest while the immune system fights infection. But in modern life, chronic low-grade inflammation from stress, diet, lack of sleep, and sedentary behavior keeps these circuits partially activated. The brain receives constant signals that something is wrong, giving the overthinking mind something to ruminate about. Research found that anti-inflammatory interventions reduce rumination scores significantly on average. This doesn't mean overthinking is just inflammation, but it reveals how interconnected our physical and mental states are. Sometimes the endless question, "Why am I anxious?" has a partial answer in the body's inflammatory state, creating background signals that the mind interprets as threat. The thinking tries to find the cause, not realizing the cause is biochemical, not situational. Childhood parentification. When a child takes on adult emotional responsibilities, creates lasting overthinking patterns around other people's needs and emotions. Research found that adults who experienced parentification show hyperactive empathy circuits in brain imaging studies. As children, they learned to constantly monitor caregivers' moods, anticipate needs, and manage emotional environments beyond their developmental capacity. This creates neural pathways that prioritize others' internal states over one's own. In adulthood, these individuals overthink every relationship interaction. After conversations, they analyze whether the other person is okay, whether they said something hurtful, whether they gave enough support, whether they're being adequate. The focus remains outward. They can spend hours ruminating about someone else's concerns while completely neglecting their own emotional needs. Studies show former parentified children have difficulty even identifying their own feelings. When asked, "How do you feel?" they often respond with, "I think" statements, having learned early that their feelings weren't the priority. The overthinking about others isn't just empathy. It's a survival pattern from a childhood where their safety depended on managing adults' emotional states. Recognizing this pattern is often profoundly painful but necessary for redirecting care toward the self. Exercise affects overthinking through multiple biological pathways. Studies show that a single moderate-intensity exercise session reduces rumination for hours afterward through several mechanisms. Exercise increases GABA, the brain's calming neurotransmitter, while reducing activity in regions hyperactive during rumination. It also increases endocannabinoids, the body's natural substances that create a sense of ease and well-being. Long-term, regular exercise promotes neuroplasticity in the hippocampus, improving the brain's ability to contextualize threats accurately rather than overgeneralizing from past negative experiences. Research comparing aerobic exercise to meditation and cognitive therapy found comparable reductions in rumination across all three interventions, suggesting exercise works through fundamentally different pathways. The challenge for chronic overthinkers is that overthinking often creates paralysis. Ruminating about whether to exercise, what kind, how long, whether they're doing it right. Understanding that even imperfect, inconsistent exercise provides measurable benefit can help bypass the analysis paralysis. The body's movement interrupts the mind's loops in ways that thinking about movement never can. Validation, the simple act of acknowledging that thoughts and feelings make sense given context, powerfully reduces rumination. Research shows that validation decreases emotional arousal and defensive thinking, while invalidation increases rumination significantly. When someone says you're overthinking it or just don't worry about it, the invalidation triggers secondary rumination about whether the feeling is justified, whether something is wrong with you for having it. The overthinking intensifies, trying to prove to yourself or others that the feeling is reasonable. Validation doesn't mean agreement or encouragement. It means acknowledging that given your history, nervous system, and circumstances, the reaction makes sense. For chronic overthinkers, self-validation is particularly difficult because they've often internalized invalidating messages. Their own inner voice says this is unnecessary. Stop thinking about it, which only fuels more thinking. Brain imaging during validation shows decreased amygdala activity and increased prefrontal regulatory capacity. The nervous system can begin calming when the response is acknowledged as understandable rather than pathological. This is why trauma-informed approaches emphasize validation as a precursor to change. You can't release what you're simultaneously condemning yourself for experiencing. Halfway through our journey of understanding, we've moved beyond simple recognition into the intricate mechanisms underlying overthinking. It's not one thing but many. Neurotransmitter patterns, inflammatory signals, attachment styles, learned behaviors, trauma response, cultural conditioning, cognitive distortions, and structural brain differences all interweaving. Understanding this complexity matters because it reveals why just stop thinking about it has never worked. You're not failing to do something simple. You're trying to shift multiple biological and psychological systems with nothing but conscious intention. The understanding phase shows us that overthinking makes sense given the variables at play. It's not random or chosen. It emerges from specific, identifiable conditions. This understanding, rather than fixing anything, creates a different relationship to the experience. Not what's wrong with me, but what systems are activating and why. That shift from self-blame to curiosity opens the first real possibility for something to change. You're still here, still awake, still listening through these facts about minds that won't rest. Take a slow breath. Notice how your thoughts might have quieted just a little, or maybe they haven't. Either way is okay. We're exploring consciousness together. You, me, and everyone else who's ever lain awake wondering why their brain won't stop. If this feels like a safe space, a gentle like or subscribe helps another overthinker find their way here too. One quiet tap, one peaceful mind at a time. Let's continue releasing now. Acceptance and commitment therapy, developed by Dr. Stephen Hayes, offers a different approach to overthinking than traditional cognitive therapy. Rather than challenging or changing thoughts, a CT teaches psychological flexibility, the ability to be present with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings while taking action toward values. Research shows that ACT produces comparable or better outcomes for rumination, particularly for individuals who've tried traditional thought-challenging techniques without success. The core principle is that trying to control thoughts actually increases their frequency and power. Instead, a CT teaches diffusion, seeing thoughts as mental events rather than truths or commands. A thought like, "I'm going to fail," isn't a prediction requiring analysis or a reality needing prevention. It's just words passing through awareness. Brain imaging studies show that diffusion techniques reduce the sense of self-referential meaning in thoughts. This creates space for action, despite the presence of anxious thoughts. You can notice my mind is telling me I'll fail and still prepare for the meeting. Send the message. Have the conversation. The thoughts don't have to quiet down before you can live. They can be present background noise while you focus on what actually matters. The concept of letting go often frustrates overthinkers because it's presented as a simple choice when it's actually a complex process. Research on thought suppression and cognitive control shows that releasing thoughts requires several steps. Noticing the thought, disengaging attention without suppressing, redirecting focus to something else, and allowing the thought to fade naturally. Each step involves different brain regions and different skills. Studies using real-time neurofeedback found that teaching people to observe their brain activity during rumination helped them develop better disengagement strategies. But the key finding was that letting go isn't a single action. It's a gradual reduction in mental engagement. Like trying to not think about something, direct suppression backfires. Instead, the thought must be acknowledged, then attention gently guided elsewhere repeatedly until the thought loses emotional charge. For chronic overthinkers, this process might need to happen many times for a single worry. It's effortful and doesn't feel like letting go at all. It feels like constant work. But understanding that this effortful process is actually how release happens can reduce the secondary suffering of believing you're failing at something that should be easy. Grief and overthinking share deep connections that are often misunderstood. After loss, whether of a person, relationship, identity, or hope, the mind naturally engages in what researchers call searching behavior, ruminating about what happened, what could have been addressed differently, what it all meant. Research shows that this rumination serves a function early in grief. The brain is trying to integrate the loss, to make sense of the change, to find meaning. Brain imaging during grief-related rumination shows activation in attachment circuits and memory systems as the mind tries to process what it cannot accept. But for some, the rumination doesn't resolve. Studies show that unresolved grief underlies many cases of chronic overthinking about themes beyond the loss itself. Overthinkers who experienced significant loss often ruminate about unworthiness, abandonment, or life's unfairness. The grief thought patterns generalize to all of life. Understanding this connection helps explain why some overthinking has such emotional weight. It's not just anxious prediction about the future, but grief-laden rumination about what's already been lost. Releasing this pattern often requires grieving what was never properly mourned, allowing sadness its full expression, rather than continuing the endless analysis of why and how and what if. Physical tension and mental overthinking exist in a reinforcing loop that works in both directions. Research in psychophysiology shows that chronic rumination creates measurable increases in muscle tension, particularly in the jaw, neck, shoulders, and chest. The thinking triggers physiological stress responses, increased heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle bracing, as if preparing for physical threat. This makes sense. Evolutionarily, the brain preparing for danger signals the body to prepare as well. But in chronic overthinking, there's no physical action to take, so the tension has nowhere to go. It just accumulates. The fascinating finding is that the relationship works in reverse too. Studies using progressive muscle relaxation found that releasing physical tension reduces rumination severity significantly on average, even without addressing thought content. When the body signals to the brain that it's safe through relaxed muscles and calm breathing, the brain reduces threat scanning and worry generation. Somatic therapies that work directly with body sensation often produce faster reductions in overthinking than purely cognitive approaches. This isn't because overthinking is all in the body, but because releasing the physical manifestation interrupts the feedback loop. The mind and body aren't separate systems, but completely intertwined aspects of one nervous system seeking safety. Forgiveness, particularly self-forgiveness, profoundly affects overthinking patterns. Studies found that self-forgiveness reduces rumination about past mistakes significantly, while self-criticism maintains or intensifies it. The mechanism involves breaking the shame rumination cycle. When you make a mistake and respond with harsh self-judgment, the shame is painful enough that the mind tries to avoid it through either suppression or excessive analysis. The overthinking becomes an attempt to think your way to either undoing the past or proving you've learned enough to deserve forgiveness. But neither works. The past cannot be changed through analysis, and self-worth cannot be earned through rumination. Self-forgiveness interrupts this by acknowledging the mistake without requiring perfection or complete understanding before release. Brain imaging studies show that self-forgiveness activates regions associated with compassion and deactivates regions associated with self-referential negative evaluation. It's not excusing harm or bypassing accountability. It's recognizing that you're human. You acted from the consciousness you had at that moment, and you can learn without endlessly punishing yourself. For overthinkers whose rumination often centers on past mistakes, this shift from self-criticism to self-compassion can be transformative. The mind finally receives permission to stop trying to think its way to worthiness. The paradox of control reveals why trying to control thoughts through overthinking creates more suffering than the thoughts themselves. Research in cognitive science distinguishes between primary suffering, the initial thought or feeling, and secondary suffering, the reaction to the initial experience. For overthinkers, secondary suffering is often far more intense. A worry arises, which is primary suffering. Then comes the cascade. Why am I thinking this? I shouldn't think this. What does it mean that I'm thinking this? I need to stop thinking this. Each layer of self-judgment and analysis adds more suffering. Studies found that overthinkers spend the majority of rumination time on secondary suffering, analyzing the fact that they're ruminating rather than the original concern. The original thought might have passed in moments, but the reaction to it persists for hours. Understanding this distinction creates a powerful intervention point. What if the initial anxious thought isn't the problem? What if the concern is the struggle against having the thought? Radical acceptance approaches suggest that primary suffering is inevitable. Minds generate all kinds of content, but secondary suffering is optional. Not easy to release, but technically optional. The freedom isn't in controlling what thoughts arise. It's in releasing the demand that thoughts be different than they are. Sleep itself, when finally achieved, actively processes and resolves emotional content in ways that rumination cannot. Research shows that REM sleep functions as overnight processing, weakening the emotional charge of memories while preserving their informational content. During REM, the brain reactivates emotional memories in a low-stress hormone state, essentially reliving experiences without the stress chemicals that accompanied them originally. This allows integration without re-traumatization. Studies found that after adequate REM sleep, people reported significantly less emotional distress about previous days' concerns, even without any intervening problem-solving. The brain had simply processed what rumination was trying unsuccessfully to resolve. For overthinkers, recognizing that sleep does the work, thinking cannot, makes prioritizing rest less indulgent and more strategic. The hours spent overthinking before sleep aren't preparation for tomorrow or processing of yesterday. They're actually preventing the processing that sleep would accomplish. This reframes the task. Instead of trying to think through to resolution before allowing sleep, the goal becomes creating conditions for sleep to occur so the real emotional processing can happen. Releasing the belief that you have to figure everything out through conscious analysis makes space for the unconscious processing that actually works. Nature exposure reduces rumination through mechanisms both psychological and physiological. Research found that walking in natural settings decreases activity in the region associated with rumination and depression, while similar, walking in urban environments showed no such effect. Nature provides what researchers call soft fascination, engaging attention in a gentle, effortless way that gives the goal-directed attention systems a break. Watching clouds move, listening to bird songs, observing water flow captures awareness without requiring analytical processing. Additionally, natural environments often lack the social complexity that triggers most overthinking. Trees don't judge you. Rivers don't expect anything. Mountains don't need you to perform or prove your worth. The mind, freed from social evaluation and practical demands, can simply exist. Studies measuring physiological markers found that nature exposure reduces cortisol, lowers blood pressure, and increases parasympathetic nervous system activation. All markers of the rest state that's incompatible with intensive rumination. For people who've carried too much for too long, nature offers what their relationships often cannot: presence without expectation, beauty without condition, acceptance without effort. Even indoor nature exposure shows measurable rumination reduction. The nervous system recognizes something ancient and safe, allowing the vigilance to finally soften. The concept of good enough challenges the perfectionism that underlies much overthinking. Research in organizational psychology shows that perfectionism creates diminishing returns beyond a certain threshold. Quality improves up to about 80% effort. Then the curve flattens dramatically. The final portion of perfectionism often consumes the majority of time and energy while producing minimal objective improvement. But for perfectionistic overthinkers, good enough feels unsafe. Brain imaging studies show that stopping work before it feels perfect activates threat response systems, suggesting the brain interprets imperfection as actual danger. This stems from early experiences where acceptance felt conditional on performance, where mistakes led to criticism or withdrawal. The nervous system learned that less than perfect equals unsafe. Challenging this pattern requires both cognitive and emotional work, intellectually understanding that good enough truly is adequate for most purposes, and emotionally processing the fear that imperfection will lead to harm. Studies using exposure-based techniques found that repeatedly submitting imperfect work and surviving the imagined catastrophic consequences gradually retrains the threat response. The brain slowly learns through experience that the predicted rejection doesn't materialize. But this process can feel terrifying for those whose entire identity has been built on being perfect enough to deserve care. Releasing perfectionistic overthinking often means grieving the impossible standard you could never meet. Halfway through our journey, we've reached the transition between understanding and releasing. The facts about release reveal a challenging truth. You cannot think your way into letting go. Rumination is itself a form of holding on, an attempt to control through analysis, to prevent through prediction, to earn safety through mental effort. Releasing requires something different: allowing, accepting, trusting that thoughts can exist without requiring response. This feels impossibly difficult for minds trained to analyze everything as protection. Every instinct says more thinking will lead to answers. But the research shows that rumination prevents the very resolution it seeks. True processing happens in sleep, in grief work, in the body, in nature, in moments of genuine acceptance, not in the endless cognitive loops. The shift from understanding to releasing marks the halfway point where intellectual knowledge must begin meeting embodied practice. You can know everything about why you overthink and still not be free. Freedom requires a different kind of knowing. The visceral understanding that you're safe enough to stop monitoring, that you can be imperfect and still belong, that your worth isn't contingent on having everything figured out. The next phase explores what becomes possible when the grip begins, however slightly, to loosen. We're halfway now, halfway through this long night's journey. Breathe with me. Notice the thoughts still circling, still trying to solve, to figure out, to understand everything. And notice something else, the part of you that's simply here, listening, breathing, existing without effort. That part doesn't need to understand anything. It's been here all along, underneath the thinking, like bedrock beneath turbulent water. You don't have to stop the water. You don't have to calm the thoughts. Just notice the stillness that's always been underneath. Rest there, if only for this moment. Now we continue, moving into reframing. Deep thinking and overthinking exist on a continuum, and the line between them is often context and outcome rather than the thinking itself. Research distinguishes reflective pondering, which leads to insight and resolution, from ruminative brooding, which loops without progress. Brain imaging shows subtle but measurable differences. Reflective thinking activates more regions associated with problem solving, while rumination activates more areas associated with self-focus. The content can be identical, but the relationship to the content differs. Reflective thinkers observe their analysis with some distance, can shift perspectives, reach tentative conclusions. Ruminative thinkers get absorbed without metacognitive awareness, repeat the same patterns, feel stuck. The reframe here is powerful. Your tendency toward deep thinking isn't the problem. Many great thinkers, artists, and innovators thought intensely. The difference was having containers, creative outlets, or contemplative practices that channeled the thinking towards something generative. Your mind's capacity for analysis is a genuine gift when directed well. The challenge isn't stopping deep thought, but developing better relationship with it. Knowing when to engage and when to release. Sensitivity is strength and vulnerability simultaneously. A both-and rather than either-or. The same nervous system that makes you more prone to overwhelm also makes you more attuned to beauty, more capable of deep connection, more able to sense what others miss. Research on sensory processing sensitivity shows that highly sensitive individuals notice subtleties in music, art, nature, and human interaction that average sensitivity people literally don't perceive. Their richer inner lives come from richer input processing. The challenge is that modern culture is designed for average sensitivity. Loud environments, bright lights, fast pacing, constant stimulation. Sensitive nervous systems aren't defective. They're simply optimized for different environments. In quiet, natural settings with space for processing. Sensitive people often thrive. In chaotic, demanding environments, they struggle. Reframing sensitivity from flaw to trait with trade-offs allows different relationship to the overthinking it often produces. Yes, you process more, which means more to think about, but you also experience more. Feel more, understand more deeply. The goal isn't to become less sensitive, but to create life circumstances that honor your nervous system's needs. The narrative you tell about your overthinking shapes its impact profoundly. Research in narrative psychology shows that people who view their rumination as pathological symptom versus those who view it as part of their thinking style experience significantly different distress levels. Even with identical rumination frequency, the stories we tell about our experiences partially create those experiences. If your narrative is, "I'm broken," "My brain doesn't work right," "I'm fundamentally flawed," the rumination becomes additional evidence of unworthiness, creating shame spirals. If your narrative is, "I have a sensitive nervous system that processes deeply," which sometimes gets stuck in loops I'm learning to navigate, the rumination becomes something to work with rather than something that defines you. Narrative therapy research shows that helping people develop more complex, compassionate stories about their struggles reduces both symptom severity and emotional distress. This isn't positive thinking or self-deception. It's recognizing that the facts of your experience can support multiple interpretations. And some interpretations allow more possibility than others. Your overthinking is real and challenging. And it's also one aspect of a complex, adaptive, sensitive mind trying its best to navigate a complicated world. both can be true. Anxiety anticipates future threat. Rumination replays past events. Both serve the same fundamental function: the illusion of control through thinking. Studies reveal what researchers call magical thinking about thoughts. The unconscious belief that thinking about something enough gives you power over it. If I can just figure out what went wrong, I can address it happening again. If I can imagine every possible future scenario, I can prepare for all of them. The mind operates as if analysis equals protection, and sometimes, in limited ways, it does. Thinking ahead has prevented countless difficulties. Analyzing past mistakes leads to genuine learning. But chronic overthinking reflects this adaptive process, continuing long past the point of usefulness. The reframe involves recognizing the positive intention behind the pattern. Your mind isn't tormenting you purposelessly. It's trying, desperately, to keep you safe using the primary tool it has: thought. Understanding the protective function creates compassion for the pattern even while working to change it. Your overthinking makes sense. It's exhausting and often counterproductive, but it emerges from a mind trying to protect you the only way it knows how. Thanking your mind for trying, while gently showing it that this level of vigilance is no longer necessary, opens different possibilities than fighting with yourself. The capacity for deep thought that leads to overthinking also enables profound empathy, creative problem-solving, and ethical reasoning. Research on cognitive complexity shows that people who can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, who can imagine others' experiences, who can foresee long-term consequences, score higher on both rumination measures and measures of moral development, creativity, and emotional intelligence. The same mental flexibility that allows you to struggle with endless what-ifs also allows you to understand nuanced situations, to see issues from all sides, to create innovative solutions. Studies comparing cognitive profiles of artists, therapists, and philosophers found they share characteristics with chronic ruminators: high openness to experience, strong pattern recognition, intense internal life. The difference is primarily in whether the thinking has productive outlets and whether there's sufficient nervous system regulation. Your tendency to think deeply about everything isn't something to eliminate. It's something to channel. Many overthinkers need creative or intellectual work that matches their mental intensity. When that work exists and is valued, the same thought patterns that create suffering in personal life create contribution in professional or artistic life. The reframe shifts from "I overthink," which is problematic, to "I think deeply," which requires appropriate channels. Post-traumatic growth. The positive psychological changes that can emerge from struggling with highly challenging life circumstances often involves reframing relationship to suffering. Research shows that a substantial portion of trauma survivors report at least some growth alongside ongoing difficulties. Greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, spiritual development, or recognition of new possibilities. The key isn't that trauma is beneficial or that suffering is necessary for growth, but that going through difficulty can catalyze changes that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. For chronic overthinkers who've carried too much emotional weight, reframing involves recognizing what the struggle has developed in you. Your hypervigilance probably makes you incredibly attuned to others' needs. Your sensitivity likely makes you deeply compassionate. Your tendency to analyze means you understand psychological complexity in ways others don't. These aren't justifications for the suffering or suggestions that it was worth it. They're acknowledgements that you've developed real capacities through difficulty. Studies show that this reframing improves resilience and reduces rumination. You're not just someone affected by your experiences. You're someone shaped by them in both painful and powerful ways. The concept of window of tolerance, developed by Dr. Dan Siegel, helps reframe dysregulation as normal variation rather than failure. Every nervous system has an optimal zone where it can process information, regulate emotion, and respond flexibly. When stressed or triggered, we move outside that window into hyperarousal or hypoarousal. For people with trauma histories or sensitive nervous systems, the window is narrower and easier to exit. What looks like overthinking triggered by nothing is actually the nervous system moving into hyperarousal, where threat detection increases and rumination intensifies. Understanding this reframes the experience from "I'm defective" to "my nervous system is outside its optimal zone and needs regulation." The solution isn't thinking differently, but helping your nervous system return to its window through co-regulation with safe others. Grounding techniques, movement, or sensory input. Research shows that as people practice recognizing when they're outside their window and develop skills to return to it, the window gradually expands. The nervous system learns it can handle more without dysregulating. But this takes time and support. In the meantime, recognizing I'm in hyperarousal instead of "I'm overthinking again because I'm weak" changes everything. It's nervous system state, not character flaw. And nervous system states can shift. Intergenerational strength exists alongside intergenerational trauma. The same families that transmit anxiety and overthinking patterns often also transmit resilience, creativity, and deep emotional intelligence. Research on family systems shows that survival strategies developed in response to hardship, including vigilance, sensitivity, and intense thinking, served important protective functions for previous generations. Your grandmother's hypervigilance might have helped your family survive during difficulty. Your parents' overthinking might have enabled them to navigate challenges. These patterns weren't pathological in their original context. They became problematic when transmitted to generations living in different circumstances where such intense vigilance is no longer adaptive. Reframing involves honoring the survival wisdom your nervous system carries, even while recognizing you can now live differently. You inherited these patterns from people who did their absolute best with the resources they had, often under impossible circumstances. The overthinking isn't weakness. It's evidence of ancestors who thought their way through genuine threats. You get to keep the strength while releasing the patterns that no longer serve. This both-and reframe creates space for gratitude and grief simultaneously. Gratitude for the survival that enabled your existence. Grief for the suffering that shaped the legacy you inherited. Many people who think too much are actually thinking the right amount for genuinely complex situations, but applying that level of analysis to everything indiscriminately. Research on decision-making shows that complex, high-stakes choices benefit from extensive analysis. Relationships, career, values, major life transitions warrant deep thought. The concern emerges when the same analytical intensity gets applied to low-stakes decisions or situations beyond your control. Spending hours ruminating about whether you might have offended someone in a casual interaction uses the same cognitive resources as making a major life decision, but with no productive outcome. Reframing involves developing discernment about what deserves deep thought versus what deserves acknowledgement and release. Studies found that teaching overthinkers to categorize concerns reduced rumination significantly without reducing effective problem solving. The shift isn't from overthinking to not thinking, but from indiscriminate analysis to strategic, purposeful thought. Your capacity for deep analysis is appropriate for some situations. Recognizing which situations those are allows you to honor your thinking style while not exhausting yourself on questions that don't warrant endless analysis. The stories you absorbed about worth, belonging, and safety shape your thought patterns in ways that can be revised. Attachment research shows that earned secure attachment is possible. People who didn't receive consistent, attuned care in childhood can develop security through later relationships and therapeutic work. Brain plasticity continues throughout life. The neural pathways formed in response to early experiences aren't permanent. Studies found measurable changes in activation patterns during social threat after intensive therapy. The narrative shifted from "I'm fundamentally unlovable and must monitor constantly for rejection" to "I am worthy of connection and can trust generally safe relationships." This reframing doesn't happen through positive thinking, but through corrective emotional experiences. Moments where the feared outcome doesn't occur, where vulnerability leads to connection instead of harm, where imperfection is met with acceptance. For chronic overthinkers, each experience that contradicts the old story slightly rewrites the nervous system's programming. You're not doomed to repeat the patterns you learned. New experiences, integrated over time, can teach your nervous system different truths. The work is challenging and often requires therapeutic support. But the hopeful research finding is clear: your brain can change. The stories driving your overthinking can be rewritten. Comparison is often where overthinking becomes most painful, and where reframing offers most relief. Social comparison research shows that humans automatically evaluate themselves relative to others. It's a fundamental cognitive process. But chronic overthinkers tend toward upward comparison, measuring themselves against those who appear to have more, do better, or struggle less. This creates perpetual inadequacy. Research found that social comparison activates the same regions involved in processing physical pain. Feeling less than literally hurts. The reframe involves several shifts. First, recognizing that you're comparing your internal experience to others' external presentation, your intimate knowledge of your struggles against their curated highlights. Second, understanding that comparison serves an evolutionary function, but in modern contexts often just generates suffering. And third, developing what researchers call self-compassionate social comparison. When you notice yourself comparing, responding with kindness rather than criticism. Studies show that self-compassion interrupts the rumination that follows unfavorable comparison. Instead of spiraling, the response becomes, "I'm struggling with overthinking." And that's difficult, just as others struggle with different challenges that aren't visible to me. This both acknowledges reality and extends the understanding you'd offer a friend. The language you use to describe your experience shapes that experience more than most people realize. Psycholinguistic research shows that the metaphors and labels we apply to internal states influence how we relate to them. Calling it my anxiety creates ownership and identification. Calling it anxiety I'm experiencing creates distance. I'm an overthinker makes it identity. I'm someone who sometimes overthinks makes it behavior. These seem like subtle distinctions, but studies found that linguistic reframing reduces emotional intensity and increases sense of agency. The most powerful reframe might be shifting from judgment words to descriptive words. I'm overthinking again. I'm exhausting myself versus my mind is highly active right now. Analyzing multiple scenarios. The first creates shame spiral and more rumination. The second creates observation and possibility for response. Research in acceptance-based therapies emphasizes describing experience in sensory and behavioral terms rather than evaluative ones. I notice my chest is tight and my thoughts are racing about tomorrow rather than I'm having anxiety and I'm struggling. This isn't minimizing genuine distress. It's removing the layer of self-judgment that intensifies it. The reframe from evaluative to descriptive language gradually changes your relationship to the internal experience. Purpose and meaning can transform the relationship to suffering in ways that directly affect overthinking patterns. Research based on logotherapy principles shows that people who've found meaning in their struggles report similar levels of difficult thoughts and emotions as those who haven't, but with dramatically different distress levels. The thoughts exist, but they're held within a framework that gives them context. For chronic overthinkers, this might mean reframing the sensitivity and deep processing not as flaws, but as capacities that enable meaningful work. Therapy, teaching, art, advocacy, parenting. Studies following people through career transitions found that those who aligned their work with their natural tendencies, including overthinking and sensitivity, showed reduced rumination and increased well-being, even without any direct mental health intervention. The deep thinking that troubles you in personal life might be exactly what makes you exceptional in work that requires empathy, analysis, foresight, or understanding human complexity. This reframe doesn't eliminate the overthinking, but it shifts it from pure liability to trait, with both costs and benefits. Your tendency to think too much might be what allows you to think deeply about things that matter, to notice what others miss. This recognition doesn't make the hard parts less hard, but it adds dimension to the story beyond suffering. Belonging and acceptance don't require changing who you are or how you think. This is perhaps the most important reframe for people who've spent their lives trying to think, feel, and be differently to earn care. Research on unconditional positive regard shows that being fully accepted while still struggling creates the safety needed for change. But the change emerges from self-acceptance, not from finally becoming acceptable. Brain imaging studies during experiences of unconditional acceptance show reduced threat activation and increased connectivity between emotional and regulatory regions. The nervous system begins to believe it's safe enough to exist as is. For overthinkers, finding communities, relationships, or therapeutic environments where the overthinking is understood rather than pathologized creates this corrective experience. You don't have to have everything figured out to belong. You don't have to stop thinking too much to be worthy of connection. Recognizing this challenges the core belief driving much rumination, that you must be different than you are to deserve care. What if you're acceptable now? Overthinking and all. What if the work isn't becoming someone else, but becoming more fully yourself? Including the challenging parts. This reframe is difficult for those whose entire lives have been organized around self-improvement. But research shows it's often the path to genuine change. Midway through the reframing phase, we've explored how shifting perspective changes experience without necessarily changing external circumstances. Your nervous system is still sensitive. Your mind still thinks deeply. Difficult experiences still happened. But the meaning of those facts can shift from evidence of brokenness to evidence of human complexity. Reframing isn't convincing yourself into positivity. It's recognizing that the stories you've been told about what your experience means aren't the only possible stories. You were taught that overthinking means you're damaged, that sensitivity means you're weak, that needing support means you're burdensome. But research and lived experience of millions reveal different truths. Overthinking can reflect a mind working hard to protect you. Sensitivity can enable deep connection and rich experience. Needing support can mean you're human. The facts don't change, but their meaning does. And meaning shapes everything. How you treat yourself. What feels possible. Whether the future holds only more suffering or also growth, connection, and moments of genuine peace. The journey continues toward resting. But this reframing creates the foundation that makes rest possible. You can't rest into a story that condemns you for needing rest. Forgiveness of others who contributed to your overthinking patterns represents complex territory that requires nuanced understanding. Research on forgiveness shows it benefits the forgiver more than the forgiven, reducing anger-related rumination, improving physical health, and decreasing depression. But studies also show that premature or coerced forgiveness can be harmful, leading to self-blame and bypassing necessary grief and anger. For people whose overthinking stems from childhood experiences with caregivers who are invalidating, neglectful, or harmful, forgiveness isn't required for healing. What is required is processing the impact, allowing the grief and anger, and eventually reaching a place where the past has less power over the present. Sometimes that includes forgiveness. Sometimes it includes acceptance without forgiveness. Understanding their limitations and wounds while acknowledging the harm caused. The reframe involves releasing the cultural narrative that says forgiveness is necessary for moving forward. Research shows that for some, especially in cases of significant harm, holding appropriate anger serves important functions. It validates that wrong was done, maintains boundaries, and affirms that you deserved better. The goal isn't forgiveness as another task to accomplish perfectly, but rather processing experience fully enough that it becomes integrated history rather than current wound. The concept of both-and thinking revolutionizes how overthinkers can hold complexity. Black and white thinking simplifies complexity into categories: good or bad, success or failure, acceptable or unacceptable. Research shows that overthinkers often engage in splitting about themselves. I'm either completely competent or completely inadequate. Either I handle everything perfectly or I'm failing. This creates impossible standards and constant disappointment. The reframe involves developing the capacity to hold contradictions simultaneously. You can be both struggling and coping, both hurt by someone's actions and understanding their limitations, both wanting to change and worthy as you are now, both carrying impacts from the past and not defined by them. Studies on dialectical thinking show that developing both-and capacity reduces emotional reactivity and rumination. When you can hold, I made a mistake, and I'm still a good person simultaneously. The mistake doesn't trigger hours of rumination about being fundamentally flawed. Neuroscience research suggests that both-and thinking activates more distributed neural networks, essentially engaging more cognitive flexibility. For minds prone to getting stuck in loops, this flexibility creates escape routes. The situation isn't all one thing. You aren't all one thing. Embracing that complexity actually simplifies the rumination because it removes the pressure to reach a single, definitive conclusion about inherently complex situations. Vulnerability and connection offer an alternative to the isolation that often accompanies chronic overthinking. Research by Dr. Brené Brown on vulnerability shows that sharing struggles authentically creates stronger connections than presenting a perfected facade. Yet for overthinkers, being vulnerable triggers intense rumination. Did I share too much? What will they think? Will they use this against me? Have I just confirmed I'm fundamentally flawed? The shame and exposure can feel unbearable. But studies found that vulnerability in safe relationships actually reduces rumination over time by disproving the core fear that your real self is unacceptable. When you share something you're ashamed of and receive acceptance rather than rejection, it contradicts the narrative driving the overthinking. Each positive experience of vulnerability slightly rewrites the expectation. The reframe involves recognizing that the risk of vulnerability, while genuine, often has higher probability of connection than the catastrophic outcomes your mind predicts. Research shows that most people respond to authentic vulnerability with increased affection and trust, not judgment. The challenge is distinguishing safe people from unsafe ones. Not everyone deserves your vulnerability, but isolating completely prevents the very connections that could help nervous system learn it's safe to be seen. Strategic vulnerability. Sharing incrementally with people who've earned trust allows testing where the connection might be safer than your overthinking predicts. Gratitude practice, when done carefully, can reframe relationship to experience without invalidating difficulty. Research shows that regular gratitude practice reduces rumination, improves sleep, and increases overall well-being. But for people with trauma or chronic overwhelm, traditional gratitude exercises can feel invalidating. Being told to focus on what's good when you're struggling feels like being told your difficulty doesn't matter. The research-supported reframe involves what's called complex gratitude, the ability to hold both suffering and appreciation simultaneously. This is really difficult, and I'm struggling. And I'm grateful for the friend who listened. Both and again. Studies comparing different gratitude approaches found that complex gratitude produces better outcomes for people with significant difficulties compared to simple positivity-focused gratitude. It doesn't bypass the hard parts or pretend they don't exist. It expands awareness to include what is working alongside what isn't. For overthinkers whose rumination focuses almost entirely on concerns, threats, and mistakes, this gradual expansion of attention creates small shifts in neural patterns. The negativity bias remains, but it's not the only thing the mind attends to. This isn't forced positivity. It's recognition that even in genuine difficulty, the full picture is more complex than pure suffering. And sometimes, that complexity itself offers relief. Time reveals that much of what felt urgently important to overthink about wasn't actually as significant as it seemed. Research on temporal perspective shows that when people evaluate past worries, a substantial majority never materialized in the way feared, and even those that did were often less catastrophic than imagined. The overthinking mind exists in a perpetual sense of urgency. This must be figured out now. This must be resolved immediately. This requires constant vigilance. But time demonstrates that many situations resolve themselves or become clear without the intensive analysis. The reframe involves developing trust in the passage of time. Not everything requires immediate resolution. Not every question needs answering right now. Many concerns that feel pressing simply need time to unfold before the right path becomes clear. Studies on delay as an intervention found that when overthinkers practiced, "I'll think about this tomorrow," they often found the concern resolved itself. Their perspective shifted with rest, or the issue simply mattered less the next day. This isn't procrastination, but strategic delay, recognizing that thinking more right now isn't productive, so explicitly choosing to defer consideration. For people whose overthinking creates exhausting urgency, this permission to delay can feel revolutionary. The question doesn't have to be answered tonight. The person doesn't have to be figured out immediately. Time exists as resource, not enemy. The narrative arc, from victim to survivor to something beyond, both reveals evolution in relationship to difficulty. Trauma research distinguishes three positions: victim, survivor, and thriver, or integrated person. Each represents different relationship to the same facts. Reframing involves recognizing that you can occupy different positions at different times. On hard days, you might feel powerless against the rumination. On better days, you feel proud of continuing despite difficulty. And sometimes, briefly, you might access something beyond both. A perspective where the overthinking is just one aspect of your experience, neither defining nor devastating. Research shows that movement through these positions isn't linear. People cycle through them repeatedly. But over time, with support and practice, the integrated position becomes more accessible. The reframe recognizes you're not failing when you feel overwhelmed by your thoughts. You're human, experiencing normal variation in perspective. And you're not required to reach some permanent state of thriving to be acceptable. The positions are all part of being human, with a complicated mind and a difficult history. Compassion for wherever you are in any given moment matters more than striving for some idealized relationship to suffering. Rest and productivity exist in relationship, not opposition. The cultural narrative says productivity is valuable. Rest is indulgent. Research reveals the opposite. Rest enables productivity. Studies on cognitive performance show that the brain needs downtime to consolidate learning, generate creative insights, and restore executive function. The default mode network, active during rest, is where memory integration and creative problem-solving occur. Working through tasks with exhausted attention produces inferior outcomes compared to working from rested attention. For chronic overthinkers who often feel they can't rest until everything is figured out or complete, this reframe matters profoundly. Rest isn't something earned through sufficient productivity. Rest is what makes productivity possible. Your overthinking often intensifies when you're exhausted, creating a cycle. Too tired to think clearly. So you think more trying to compensate, which exhausts you further. Breaking the cycle requires prioritizing rest even when everything feels unfinished. Research comparing groups found comparable or better productivity in those who prioritized rest. The overthinking that says, "I can't rest until this is done," is incorrect. You can rest now. In fact, you'll probably complete the task better after rest. This reframing challenges deeply held beliefs about worth through productivity. But it's what both research and wisdom traditions have always shown. Rest is not the opposite of productivity, but its foundation. The future you're overthinking about doesn't exist yet and might never exist in the form you're imagining. Research on prediction shows that humans are remarkably inaccurate at forecasting emotional responses to future events. Both positive and negative experiences typically have less impact than predicted. The phenomenon called affective forecasting error reveals that we overestimate both how terrible difficult things will feel and how long those feelings will last. Overthinkers spend hours ruminating about catastrophic futures that neuroscience shows they're likely imagining incorrectly. Even if the feared event occurs, the experience and recovery will probably differ from the prediction. This reframe isn't about positive thinking, but about recognizing the fundamental uncertainty of the future. All that thinking, all that preparation, all that analysis. It's grasping for control over something inherently uncontrollable. The future will be what it will be, shaped by countless variables you can neither predict nor manage. And when it arrives, you'll respond with the consciousness you have then, which will include everything you learn between now and that moment. You don't need to prepare for every possibility now. You'll adapt when needed with resources you can't currently imagine having. This release from the illusion of control through preparation can feel uncomfortable. The overthinking served the function of feeling like you were doing something about the uncertainty. But research shows the preparation rarely helps in the ways imagined. What helps is presence now and trusting your future self. Meaning-making from suffering creates fundamentally different relationship to difficulty than either accepting it or fighting it. Research on post-traumatic growth shows that people who eventually make meaning from their struggles report transformation that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. This isn't the invalidating everything happens for a reason narrative. It's the recognition that while you didn't choose the suffering, you can choose what you make of it. For chronic overthinkers, whose minds have been shaped by difficult experiences, meaning-making might involve using their deep understanding of psychological suffering to help others, creating art that gives voice to invisible struggles, or developing compassion from intimate knowledge of pain. Studies found that meaning-making doesn't reduce the fact of suffering, but changes relationship to it. The difficulty becomes part of a larger story about who you're becoming, rather than evidence of how you're damaged. The reframe involves asking not why did this happen to me, but given that this happened, what becomes possible now that wasn't before? Your sensitivity to others' suffering, your capacity for empathy, your understanding of mental health struggles. These emerged through difficulty. They don't justify the pain, but they exist as real capacities you wouldn't have otherwise. Meaning doesn't erase suffering, but it adds dimension to the story beyond victimhood. The journey through reframing reveals that your relationship to overthinking can transform even if the overthinking itself persists. You might still think too much sometimes. Your mind might still get caught in loops. Old patterns might still emerge under stress. But the meaning of those experiences, what they say about you, what they predict for your future, what they require in response, all that can shift. The reframing phase isn't about fixing or eliminating, but about seeing differently, seeing the protective intention beneath the rumination, seeing the strengths alongside the struggles, seeing the complexity and context that the overthinking itself often obscures. Most importantly, seeing yourself with compassion rather than condemnation, recognizing that you're doing your absolute best with a sensitive, complicated, beautiful mind that sometimes gets stuck trying to protect you. The facts of your experience remain, but freed from the narrow narratives that have surrounded those facts, possibility opens. Not the false promise that everything will be easy from now on, but the genuine reality that you can hold difficulty differently. You can be kind to yourself in the midst of struggle. You can recognize your worth even while working on challenges. You can rest before everything is resolved. The final phase explores what that rest might feel like. 3/4 through our journey now. Your mind has been working for so long, trying to protect you through thinking. Take a moment and thank it. Genuinely, thank your mind for trying to keep you safe, for analyzing every situation, for preparing for every possibility. It's been doing its best with the programming it received. And now, with gentleness, let it know it can rest a little. Not forever, not completely, just for these next moments. Imagine laying down a heavy backpack you've been carrying for miles, still there if you need it, but down, released, resting on the ground. Your thoughts can rest like that too. You don't have to solve anything right now. We continue now into the final phase. Simply resting. Rest is not earned through sufficient productivity or resolved concerns. Rest is your birthright as a living being, available in any moment you choose to receive it. This simple truth contradicts everything modern culture teaches. But research on sleep and recovery shows it clearly. Your body needs rest to survive. Your mind needs rest to function. These needs don't become invalid because you still have unanswered questions. In fact, the questions remain unanswered precisely because you haven't rested enough to approach them with clarity. The permission to rest now. Even though your mind insists everything must be figured out first, represents choosing biological truth over psychological habit. You are safe enough right now to let your vigilance soften. Perhaps not completely safe. Life rarely offers that. But safe enough that this level of monitoring isn't necessary. Your brain maintains heightened threat detection because it learned that letting down guard meant harm. That was real then. But check this present moment. Not with thoughts, but with senses. What do you hear? What do you see in this specific moment? Check whether you're in immediate danger. Most likely, you're not. The threats your mind warns about exist in possible futures or painful pasts. Recognizing this gap creates space. You can acknowledge the mind's concerns while noting that, right now, you're safe enough. The present moment is the only moment that actually exists. Though this is easy to forget when thinking about past and future feels so vivid. When you ruminate about yesterday, your brain activates memory networks, creating experiences that feel current even though they're reconstructions. When you worry about tomorrow, prediction networks activate. Meanwhile, the actual present receives minimal attention. The overthinking mind essentially time travels constantly, leaving the present moment abandoned. Research on present moment awareness shows it reduces rumination, not by stopping thoughts, but by relocating awareness. The thoughts continue, but attention rests in what's actually happening now. When the mind insists you should be thinking about other times, you can gently note those are thoughts about other times and return to sensing this moment. Thoughts are mental events, not commands or truths. This distinction fundamentally changes relationship to overthinking. When a thought arises, the overthinking mind treats it as important information requiring analysis. But cognitive science reveals thoughts are simply electrochemical events, generated by complex interactions of memory, emotion, and current inputs. They're not necessarily accurate or important. They're just happening, like weather in the mind. Rain doesn't require response. It's just weather. Anxious thoughts don't require response either. They're just mental weather. You don't have to believe thoughts. You don't have to analyze them. You can simply notice them arising and let them pass. Your worth is not contingent on having everything figured out or being free from struggle. This statement might trigger intense resistance in the overthinking mind. But research on well-being shows no correlation between psychological struggle and human worth. You don't become more valuable by suffering less or thinking more clearly. Your existence itself is the source of worth, independent of mental state. People who think too much are not less deserving of rest, connection, and kindness. The difficulty doesn't make you defective. For many overthinkers, truly accepting this requires grieving the effort spent trying to earn worth through perfection, through figuring everything out. You were always acceptable. Even now, healing is not linear, and expecting it to be creates unnecessary suffering. Research on recovery shows patterns of improvement, to regression, plateaus, and sudden shifts. Anything but straight progress. Some days the overthinking will be intense despite everything you've learned. This doesn't mean you're failing. It means healing is complex, affected by stress, sleep, relationships, and countless variables. The reframe involves measuring progress over months rather than days. Are there more moments of peace than there were 6 months ago? Can you recognize the patterns faster? Are you slightly kinder to yourself? These subtle shifts matter more than dramatic transformation. And on the hard days when nothing seems to have changed, that's also part of healing. Sometimes it's just difficult. Not forever. Just hard right now. Connection with others who understand provides something thinking alone cannot. The overthinking mind often isolates, believing no one else could possibly understand. But research on therapeutic communities shows that feeling understood by others with similar experiences reduces rumination more effectively than individual strategies. Something about being witnessed in your struggle, having someone nod knowingly when you describe the thought spirals, dissolves the loneliness that amplifies suffering. Often, just the experience of "me too, I know exactly what you mean," creates the nervous system regulation that hours of individual thought work cannot. If you've never found your people, others who think too much, who understand the exhausting vigilance, that search is worth the vulnerability it requires. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is choosing not to engage with a thought, even a thought that feels urgent. The overthinking mind generates hundreds of questions and concerns daily. Each one presents itself as important, requiring immediate attention. But research shows that engaging with every thought creates overwhelming cognitive burden. Not every thought deserves or benefits from engagement. Some thoughts are worth exploring. Many thoughts are just mental noise, repeated loops, or anxiety signals that don't contain useful information. When a familiar, anxious thought arises, maybe it's the many time today, you can simply note there's that thought again and redirect attention elsewhere. Not suppressing it, just not engaging. Over time, thoughts that don't receive engagement arise less frequently. Your body holds wisdom your mind often misses. While the overthinking mind analyzes and plans and worries, the body offers simple, direct information. This feels safe or unsafe, pleasant or unpleasant, expansive or contracted. Research on somatic intelligence shows that bodily sensations often provide more accurate guidance than cognitive analysis. The gut feeling, the sense of ease or tension in your chest, the relaxation or bracing in your shoulders, these communicate what the thinking mind might miss. For people who've spent years privileging thought over sensation, returning to body awareness requires practice. It means pausing the mental analysis to ask, what does my body feel right now? The body doesn't overthink. It simply responds to present reality with remarkable accuracy. Acceptance is active, not passive. This matters because many overthinkers resist acceptance, believing it means resignation. But research distinguishes radical acceptance, acknowledging reality as it is in this moment. From approval or surrender, you can accept that you're experiencing anxiety right now while still working toward less anxiety overall. Acceptance simply means stopping the exhausting argument with what already is. The overthinking mind spends enormous energy resisting reality. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't feel this way. All perhaps true. But reality doesn't change because you think it shouldn't be this way. Studies show that resistance intensifies suffering, while acceptance creates space for effective response. Acceptance isn't the end goal. It's the starting point from which actual change becomes possible. Sleep cannot be forced through effort or willpower, which creates particular frustration for overthinkers. The harder you try to sleep, the more activated your system becomes, preventing the very state you're seeking. Research on sleep paradox shows that effort and sleep are incompatible. Sleep requires letting go of all effort, including the effort to sleep. For minds that approach every challenge through analysis and control, this creates an impossible situation. The solution involves redirecting attention away from sleep itself. Instead of pressure to sleep, the practice becomes focusing on simple sensory experiences. Not to fall asleep, but just to have something to attend to other than the pressure. Studies found that when people with insomnia stopped trying to sleep and instead practiced present moment awareness of sensory experience, sleep came more readily. Tonight, if sleep doesn't come easily, that's okay. You can still rest. That counts. Forgiveness of self for all the time spent overthinking, for all the opportunities missed while trapped in rumination, represents profound work. The regret itself can become something to overthink, but research on self-forgiveness shows it reduces rumination more effectively than self-criticism. You did the best you could with the nervous system you had, the programming you received, the resources available. Every moment of overthinking made sense given the variables in play. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean approving of the pattern. It means releasing the additional suffering of condemning yourself for struggling. You were struggling. That's what was happening. Judging yourself harshly doesn't undo the past. It just adds more pain. The practice involves noticing self-judgment and consciously replacing it with understanding. The goal is not to never think deeply again. Deep thinking serves you in many contexts: creative work, complex problem solving, understanding yourself and others. The issue is discernment, knowing when deep thinking serves you and when it traps you. Research on rumination versus reflection shows the difference isn't content but process. Reflection moves toward understanding. Rumination loops without progress. With practice, you can notice which mode you're in. Does this thinking feel productive or stuck? Is this leading somewhere or circling? When you notice rumination, the practice isn't stopping thought. It's shifting the type of thought, From why am I inadequate to what's one small thing that might help, your capacity for deep thought is gift. The work involves channeling it more skillfully. There is no deadline for healing, no timeline you must meet, no standard you're falling short of. This runs counter to everything achievement-oriented culture teaches. But recovery research shows healing happens at its own pace, influenced by countless variables you don't control. Your history is unique. Your nervous system is unique. Your resources are unique. Someone else's journey has no bearing on yours. The practice involves releasing expectations about where you should be and accepting where you actually are. Maybe you're still struggling intensely with patterns you've worked on for years. That doesn't mean you're failing. Or maybe you've made progress but still have hard days. That's also normal. What you can control is showing up for yourself with consistency and compassion. Small moments of peace matter as much as dramatic transformation. The overthinking mind often dismisses brief respites. I felt okay for 20 minutes, but then the anxiety returned. So it doesn't count. But research shows that frequent small positive experiences contribute more to overall well-being than rare, intense ones. That 20 minutes of peace mattered. Your system got to rest. Even briefly, you got evidence that peace is possible. The practice involves actually acknowledging and savoring those moments instead of dismissing them. When you notice the overthinking has quieted, maybe you're absorbed in music or watching rain, pause and fully inhabit that moment. This isn't grasping to make it last. It's simply recognizing right now, in this moment, I'm okay. Over time, those moments accumulate. The stories you tell about your experience create your experience in ways neuroscience is only beginning to understand. Two people can have identical thought patterns, but vastly different suffering levels based solely on the narrative surrounding those patterns. If your story is, I have overthinking patterns I'm learning to work with, you experience the thoughts differently than if your story is, I'm fundamentally broken and will never be okay. Research shows that consciously crafting more helpful stories reduces distress significantly. Your narrative might acknowledge I have a sensitive, highly analytical mind, shaped by difficult experiences. It sometimes gets stuck trying to protect me. I'm learning skills to work with it more skillfully. That's truthful and allows space for both struggle and hope. You have some agency in which stories you tell yourself. Community and belonging profoundly affect nervous system regulation in ways individual strategies cannot replicate. Research shows that feeling safe in connection with others activates pathways that support calm, connection, and healing. Isolation, even chosen isolation, keeps the nervous system in defensive states where overthinking intensifies. For people who've experienced betrayal or rejection, seeking connection feels terrifying. The overthinking tries to protect you by keeping you isolated. But that very isolation prevents the nervous system regulation that comes through safe connection. The practice involves tiny risks, sharing slightly more with someone who's proven safe, joining a group, responding when someone reaches out. Research shows that even one genuinely safe connection can begin shifting nervous system patterns. You don't need a large community. Just a few people you can be real with. Sometimes the kindest thing you can tell yourself is, I don't have to figure this out right now. The urgency driving much overthinking is often illusory. The situation feels pressing, but honestly examining it reveals that most questions don't require immediate answers. The relationship question consuming your thoughts, you don't have to decide right now. The worry about whether you said the wrong thing, you can't change it right now anyway. When urgency arises, the practice involves questioning it. Does this actually need to be resolved right now? Usually, the worst case is tolerating uncertainty, which is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. Studies found that postponing consideration of worries reduces rumination without negative consequences. Your mind will insist everything is urgent. You can gently acknowledge that while recognizing most things truly aren't, joy and suffering can coexist, and allowing joy doesn't betray the suffering you've experienced. For people who've carried too much emotional weight for too long, this permission matters deeply. There's often unconscious belief that if you let yourself fully enjoy something, you're minimizing your struggles. The guilt becomes another thing to overthink. But research shows that the capacity to access joy alongside ongoing difficulty predicts better outcomes. It's not either or, but both and. You can hold grief about what you've been through and delight in a beautiful sunset. The experiences don't cancel each other out. The practice involves noticing when joy arises and actually letting yourself feel it instead of immediately thinking about why you shouldn't. Let it be there, fully. For as long as it's there, the suffering will return. Life guarantees that, but the moments of joy matter too. Your sensitivity, which makes you vulnerable to overthinking, also enables you to experience beauty, connection, and meaning more deeply than many people can access. Research shows this clearly. The same trait that makes you overwhelmed also makes you moved to tears by music, profoundly affected by art, capable of experiencing awe in nature. The depth of your inner life, the complexity of your emotional landscape, the richness of your thought, these aren't separate from the overthinking. They emerge from the same sensitive, deep processing mind. Reframing involves recognizing that you're not trying to eliminate sensitivity or deep thinking, but to work with them skillfully, to protect yourself from overwhelm, while still allowing the profound experiences your sensitivity enables. The goal isn't a quiet, simple mind that would eliminate what makes you who you are. The goal is befriending your complicated mind, understanding its needs, and creating life conditions that honor rather than constantly demand you be different. That's not fixing. That's self-acceptance. After this long journey through 100 facts, we arrive not at answers, but at presence. All the understanding about neurotransmitters and attachment patterns matters. But ultimately, this moment is what's real. The thinking about the past and future happens now. The worrying happens now. The peace, when it comes, happens now. Everything is actually just now, endlessly unfolding. The overthinking tries to escape this moment because this moment sometimes feels unbearable. But research shows that the escape creates more suffering. What if you could be here, fully? Even when here is uncomfortable, the breath continues. The heart beats. Life happens, whether the mind analyzes it or not. These facts you've heard tonight, maybe some resonated. Maybe some will be forgotten. That's okay. They were never meant to be memorized, but simply to accompany you, to offer perspective and companionship in the specific kind of struggle that comes with a mind that thinks too much. You are more than your thoughts. This seems obvious intellectually, but feels revolutionary when truly understood. The thoughts arise in you, but they aren't you. The anxiety exists in your experience. But it isn't the totality of who you are. You are the awareness that notices thoughts, the space in which experience happens. Research shows that meditation and mindfulness strengthen this sense of self as awareness, distinct from self as content. The chattering mind is one aspect of your experience, not the whole thing. When you recognize this, the thoughts lose some of their power. They're still present, maybe still uncomfortable, but they're weather passing through rather than your entire reality. This shift comes from experiencing it directly, in moments where you notice you're observing your thoughts rather than being completely identified with them. The practice is noticing there's anxiety instead of I am anxious. The distinction matters more than words can capture. Healing doesn't mean you'll never struggle again. It means you'll struggle differently, with more awareness, more self-compassion, more skills, more understanding of your patterns. Research shows that expecting complete elimination of symptoms sets people up for disappointment. Mental health challenges are often lifelong to some degree, with periods of intensity and periods of ease. For chronic overthinkers, there will likely always be times when the mind gets stuck. But you can develop relationships to those loops that make them less devastating. You can recognize them earlier. You can have more tools. You can be kinder to yourself. And gradually, the loops might get less frequent or less intense. The practice involves releasing the fantasy of perfect mental health and accepting the reality of being human, which includes struggle. Some days will still be hard, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. Everything that needed to be said has been said. And still there's one more fact. So here's what remains. You deserve rest. You deserve peace. You deserve to take up space and to feel what you feel without shame. These aren't things you earn through perfect behavior or solved concerns. They're yours by virtue of being alive. The culture lies constantly about this, suggesting worth is conditional, that rest is earned. But research and wisdom traditions agree your inherent worth is unchangeable, and your need for rest is as fundamental as your need for food. Tonight, tomorrow, and in all the nights to come, you can choose to receive what's already yours. The permission to be exactly as you are. The overthinking might whisper that you haven't earned it yet. You can notice that whisper and rest anyway. Not getting rid of who you are, but learning to hold yourself with more gentleness. And so we end where all journeys end. In this singular moment, your mind has traveled tonight, through neuroscience and memory, through childhood and this very breath, all of it to arrive here, where you've always been, the one who's been listening, who's been breathing, who's been present underneath all the thinking. The thoughts will continue. Tomorrow will bring new things to analyze. But perhaps, after this long night of exploring minds that think too much, something has shifted. A little more understanding, a little more compassion, a little more recognition that you're not alone. The real truth about people who think too much isn't about pathology. It's about humans with deep, sensitive minds trying their best to navigate a complicated world, often while carrying burdens they didn't choose. You think too much because your mind is trying to protect you, because you feel deeply, because you care intensely. These aren't flaws. They're evidence of a rich inner life that sometimes gets tangled. Rest now. Let the thoughts be there if they're there. Let the peace be there if it comes. All of it is allowed. You're okay. Right now. In this moment. Exactly as you are. You're okay. And that's the final fact: your okayness was never in question. Though the overthinking mind will spend forever questioning it, you can rest now. And so, our quiet journey through the landscape of minds that think too much comes to a gentle close. We've traveled from recognition of the weight you carry, through understanding why your mind works this way, into releasing what cannot be controlled, reframing your relationship to the struggle, and finally into this place of rest. From the neural pathways that won't quiet down, to the childhood origins of vigilance, to the moment you recognize you can be kind to yourself even while still struggling, we've glimpsed how overthinking is both burden and evidence of a deep, sensitive mind trying its best. Minds that think too much remind us that consciousness itself is both gift and mystery. Much of the most important human work happens in the invisible space of thought and feeling, where you process experiences others might dismiss, where you carry emotions others might not notice, where you create meaning from complexity. Your overthinking reveals extraordinary capacity for reflection, empathy, and depth. Without minds like yours, the world would lose essential wisdom that comes only through the hard work of thinking deeply about what it means to be human. By pausing to understand yourself with compassion, you've glimpsed the extraordinary hidden in what feels ordinary. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can, as deep as possible. Think about all the minds listening right now, all across the world, each one carrying its own thoughts, worries, questions. You are connected to them through the shared experience of being human with a complicated inner life. None of you are alone in this. Not really. Your thoughts, unique as they feel, arise from the same universal patterns of human consciousness seeking safety, meaning, belonging. Let your entire being dissolve into that ocean of shared experience. The boundaries between your mind and the minds of others softening. All of it just consciousness, arising and passing, thinking and resting, struggling and healing. Prepare for deep sleep now. No separation left. Only the gentle flow of awareness itself. No questions requiring answers. Only peace. If this thoughtful exploration of overthinking brought you even a moment of peace or understanding tonight, a gentle like and subscribe helps other tired minds discover this sanctuary too. One quiet tap helps another person who thinks too much find their way here, to this understanding, to this compassion. One peaceful mind, one sleepy soul at a time. But there's no need to do anything now. Nothing at all. You've traveled far tonight, through the territory of your own mind, seeing it with more clarity and compassion than before. You can allow these thoughts about overthinking to fade now, like morning mist dissolving in gentle sunlight, leaving only the soft calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if gravity itself is inviting you to sink into rest, to release all the vigilance, all the monitoring, all the endless preparation for futures that haven't arrived. If sleep comes, let it carry you like a river carrying a leaf, smoothly, inevitably, into a realm where analysis isn't needed and thinking finally rests. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they're closed, to stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, the thoughts will still arise. Questions will still surface. Your mind will still work the way it works. But tonight, Tonight belongs to stillness. Tonight, you can rest from the labor of trying to figure everything out. Rest well, beautiful mind, and remember, your worth was never contingent on quieting the thoughts. You are always enough. Overthinking and all, fall asleep to gentle facts. Dream deeper with psychology. Relax, listen, and drift into sleep. Good night.